what I do is really, it's cultural studies, and those of you who know what cultural studies is, it's an application of Marxist ideas, continental philosophy, to the subject of everyday life. So it's really applying complex ideas to the way that we live every day, and it's kind of evolved largely due to its travelling across the pond to America into media studies, which you will have heard of, because that's the safe side of cultural studies. Oh yeah, we can analyse the media, we can have a look at films, and although there is some radical media studies which I would recommend. But so what I'm going to do is to introduce you to the basics of cultural studies, the way that I used to teach it to first year undergraduates. When we had a cultural studies programme where I work, we don't anymore because we can't guarantee that you'll get students jobs. In fact, very often they'll come out of a cultural studies degree wondering why they bother to work at all. So, the degree was cancelled. I still try and teach this stuff as often as I can. If you're interested in cultural studies, when we finish these sessions, I can give you some reading to do. I would direct you immediately to Stuart Hall, who is the well-known founder of cultural studies in the UK. And so any of his work, I'm sure and he's a fabulous writer, so you can really enjoy reading it. So what we're doing tonight is I'm going to introduce you to the study of linguistics, actually. And then we're going to go on and do what's generally referred to as vulgar Marxism. This is Marxism in its most basic form. And the reason I'm teaching it in this form is because I want to link it to linguistics. What I'm going to do is I'm going to link the study of ideology, what Marx introduced us to, the idea, the concept of ideology, to the way that we use language, and more specifically the way that we make meaning from language. The relationship between language and what it means is not necessary. In other words, it is something that is constructed in human cultures. And this is something that once you've got to grips with, you can understand how ideology works through the way we experience the world around us in our everyday lives. So we'll start with this one, because I'm going to be talking about something called texts. And I want you to get fixed in your minds before we do anything else that there are no hidden meanings in a text. Texts mean, but they don't hide meaning. I will be talking about text in several different ways, but one thing that is good to start with is to get to grips with the idea that everything is a text, and everything we read is a text, and everything we see is something that we read. Reading is not just opening a book and reading the words on a page. You walked into this space and you read it. If you didn't, you wouldn't know you were in the right place. If you were someone that was not familiar with British culture and you walked into this space, you may not have read it correctly. And very often you will walk into a space and not read it correctly. So ask yourself, how on earth did you know that you walked into the right space? This could be a cinema. I mean, you've got the elements of a cinema. You've got a screen. You've got a load of seats, and everybody's facing the same way. I'm not showing a film. And you knew you weren't coming to see a film. Why is that? Okay, there are certain codes, there are certain clues that you read constantly in order to navigate the world. And the way that you read those codes is highly political. It's highly motivated, as we say. Okay, there is nothing innocent about it at all. So just get this fixed in your mind as we proceed. There are no hidden meanings in a text. Okay, so you're going to be introduced to a lot of dead white European males during these 3 sessions. I'm sorry about that. It's the easiest way to do it. The reason for that is not that dead white European males were that much brighter, or that they were the ones that were the only ones to come up with ideas. It's just that they had the leisure and the privilege to write them down and to teach them to a lot of people. Nevertheless, I also have to say that, first of all, if you've got a name of somebody, it really helps to remember the idea. The idea, if you hang it on a picture of somebody or somebody's name, it helps you to remember. Also, when you're reading other texts, you will come across, for instance, we're going to be talking about Ferdinand de Saussure. You will see in various texts that you read of cultural studies and continental philosophy, semiotics referred to, or Saussurean linguistics. When they say Saussurean linguistics, this is what they mean. So he was kind of the guy that started it. Also, the other thing to remember, and you will know this when we get to session 3, is that a lot of feminist and race theory relies on the ideas that these guys introduced. This is a response to, it's not necessarily agreeing, but it is a response to them. And because so much of cultural studies, critical theory as we call it, and continental philosophy responds to these guys, it's worth knowing their names. Okay, but I'm not going to labour the point, I'm not going to give you their biographies. He was a French guy, okay? Early 20th century, so this is more than 100 years ago now. And he taught something called a course in general linguistics. He was not teaching anything to do with ideology. He was not interested in politics. He wasn't particularly interested in philosophy. What he was interested in was what he calls the science of signs. This point in the 20th century, everybody's trying to do science, because science, and you know, this is what the Conservative government is trying to bring back now. Science has the kudos, it has the authority. If you say you're doing anything else, if you say you're doing cultural studies, if you say you're doing media studies, people sneer. You're the wrong sort of expert. So, early 20th century, pretty much similar. Everybody was trying to do science. And he was interested in how signs make meaning. And he didn't write anything down, actually. His students wrote it all for him. And so the course in general linguistics, as you read it now, it was actually written by his students. A sign is anything, pretty much. It's a word, either written or spoken, an image or a sound. There are signs in music, there are signs around us, as you will see in this room all the time. It is a word on a page, it is the words I am speaking right here, right now. In fact, every time a word leaves my lips, its meaning changes because it meets you. And when it meets you, you interpret it slightly differently from everybody else because of your location in time, your gender, your race, various other things about you will mean that the way that you interpret that sign is ever so slightly different for everybody. We'll come back to that in session 3. And I've also said there that signs can also be a smell or a texture, but I'm actually going to be talking about visual signs, because visual signs are the easiest to get hold of because we are surrounded by them. We are a very, very visual culture, so we are reading visual signs constantly. And back to text again, so now I'm going to give you another meaning for the word text. A text is a network of signs. This room is a network of signs. And the reason I mentioned you lot is that you are all signs. You are all part of it. And this network of signs gives the room its meaning. And they all refer to each other, as you will see. Okay, so philosophical furniture and pets. Animals and furniture always come into philosophy. So here's my dog and my cat. Just to introduce you to them, these are signs. And this is the visual sign, a visual sign for a dog. And so is this, weirdly. You have to say, what I'm going to do now is defamiliarise really familiar things. So once they're defamiliarised, you can pull them apart and examine them. It is kind of strange that we make the sounds d or g, or we say dog, or we look at this, and into our mind comes an idea of dog. Same with cat. So according to Ferdinand de Saussure, Saussure looks into the sort of the way that we receive sounds and the way that we receive visual signs, and he reckons that this is how it works. And so we're starting with the dog. The signifier is the code. The code is the image, the word dog, the three sounds d, o, g. And the signified is the concept associated with that code. And the concept on its most basic level, this is the really, really basic level. This is what linguists do. They break things down to the most absolute basics. It's really simple. I mean, it's got 4 legs, a tail, it barks, it's not a cat. These things, 4 legs, tail, barks, these are things we know about dogs. Not cat is what Saussure says we do when we see a sign. We test it against what it is not. This is incredibly important. It's fundamentally important for understanding how ideology works. And it's highly cultural, as you will see. It's not a cat. It's not a wolf, because wolf is something found with dogs. It is another animal with 4 legs. Actually, since Darwin, we do the whole not wolves thing because we know about the fact that dogs are descended from wolves. Pre-Darwin, might have been not something else, who knows? Culture changes, codes change, meanings change. The other thing Saussure says, which is quite interesting I think, he said we test it against words that it sounds like. So dog, not bog, or God, which is dog backwards. So this is how he says psychologically we make meaning out of signs. So this is for you. There's your cat, there's your code. What's the signified, folks? You tell me.
Got 4 legs and a tail.
Got 4 legs and a tail, right, what else?
Not a dinosaur.
Not a dinosaur.
Not mouse?
Yeah, not mouse, yes.
Dog.
Not dog, yeah. That's not dinosaur, yeah, I suppose so.
Got 4 legs and a tail, dinosaur.
I think you've got the idea though. So, 4 legs, a tail, it says meow. It's not a dog. I said not tiger,
Yeah.
and I also said not bat,
Mm,
because it sounds like.
cat, yeah.
Okay. This is the basic boring level. Not particularly interesting, but you need to kind of now. But you have. What I've done now is I've deconstructed these ideas for you. So let's move on to something slightly more interesting. The relationship between the signifier and the signified, so between the code and its concept, is, Saussure says, arbitrary. There is no necessary relationship between the sound, dog, and the animal, dog. Obviously I couldn't bring an animal in, so I had to give you the picture again, but you get the meaning, okay? It is completely arbitrary. If it wasn't, if there was an absolute law, a natural law that says we have to call this animal a dog, there would only be one language in the world. Okay? It's not only that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary and different in different languages, it's that there are different concepts in different cultures, which is something you need to remember. The other thing to remember is that the signifier and the signified are inseparable. Saussure says they're like 2 sides of a piece of paper, and you can't actually cut between the 2. He's only separating it in order to study it. Very important. Language means negatively. Language only ever means in terms of what it is not. Because there's no necessary relationship between the sound dog and the animal dog, we have to test it against what it's not. There's no positives in it. So we only know what it is by separating it out from all the other things in the world that are like it. At this point you just have to believe me, and you have to believe Saussure. As we move on, you will see how it works. Okay, so signs acquire meaning through difference, and difference is fundamental to how meaning is made. Difference is the only way that we make meaning. You just have to believe me on that, and you'll see as we progress exactly how that is relevant to the study of ideology. The other important things. Meaning is an agreement between a community of language speakers. We have agreed that that's a dog. Again, think about other languages. Other languages, they've agreed that this animal is called something else. So, anybody here speak another language? So tell me what a dog is in another language.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry?
Hond
In what language?
in Dutch.
In Dutch. Fantastic.
Yes.
Because that's so different. That's so different. Let's have another one.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. In what,
Yes.
in what language?
Polish.
In Polish. So completely and utterly different. And actually, it has a different meaning. It's not quite the same animal because dogs in different cultures have a different function in the culture. I remember many years ago I went to Trinidad and my plane was late and it landed in the middle of the night and my taxi driver said, "Have you got a knife?" And I'm like, "No." "Have you got a pair of scissors?" I'm like, "What? Oh my God, where am I?" And he said, "Oh, because of the dogs." He said, "You've got to walk quite a way to get to the house where you're going from where I drop you." It's like deep in the bush. And there are wild dogs and you need to defend yourself. Because obviously I was terrified. But I had pet dogs.
Yes.
And so, you know, I think it's a really good illustration of the different meaning of signs in different cultures. So when you hear a different sound associated with something like an animal, it really does have a different meaning. So, this is where it gets really interesting. Saussure called what we've just been talking about, the signifier and the signified being inseparable, two sides of a piece of paper, the denotative level of signification, and I always think of it as the boring level of signification. Denotative, yeah, that's it. The basic, what it tells you, what you need to know to just differentiate something from something else in the material world on a very basic level. That's denotative. What we're moving on to now is the connotative level of signification. This is where it really gets interesting. So I've squeezed denotation into the left-hand box here. And on the right-hand box, I have started to connote. This is a connotative level of signification. This is what the cat means in a cultural context, in the context of British culture in the 21st century, probably. I could be wrong. So, weirdly feminine. We'll get into that later. Agreed? Cats are thought of as feminine. Yeah, differentiated from dogs, which are masculine for some bizarre reason. Independent, supposedly. Stealthy, apparently. Cats, yeah, I guess so. Black ones, supposedly unlucky. Where does that come from? Anybody know?
No, they can be lucky too.
They can.
Can they indeed? Yes. Okay. So where does all that come from? Where do we get that?
Cultural, but I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know, most of these things, we don't know where it comes from. It's from history. It's from literature, very often. Sensuous, natural enemy of mice, supposedly, which is familiar. That's a good one. That's from history, and that's from particular periods of history and particular understandings of women and femininity, and particular fear of women and femininity, in fact. Household pet, yeah, but not everywhere. Given to smiling if Cheshire. Now, yeah, some people know it. Does anybody not know what I mean there?
That's a literary reference.
It's a literary reference, yeah. It's Alice in Wonderland. Which in British culture, most people know. Even if you weren't born here. You know Alice in Wonderland, you know about the Cheshire Cat. And so this is one of the connotations of cat. And supposedly 9 lives. I've got no idea where that comes from. But in another culture, the connotations would be different. Okay? Some of them would be the same or similar, others would be completely and utterly different. So, moving on. Now we can do dogs. Over to you. Let's have some connotations of dog.
Loyal.
Yeah, supposedly, yes.
Aggressive.
Yeah.
Submissive.
Yeah, they're both, aren't they? They are aggressive and submissive, so
Sexually aggressive.
sexually aggressive. Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
I was dogs.
yeah, because we describe people as dogs. I mean, this is one of the things that they're so much a part of the culture that you can describe a person as a dog and mean that they're sexually aggressive. Yeah.
Blindly obedient.
Sorry?
Blindly obedient.
Blindly obedient, yes.
Hunters.
Carnivorous.
Yeah, carnivorous.
Hunting.
Yeah.
Protection,
Yeah. Protective.
medical.
Yeah. Anything else? Anything that you can think of that's a literary reference or?
Oh, Sherlock.
Dribbling.
Yeah, there's Sherlock Holmes, there's Hound of the Baskervilles, isn't there? Yeah.
English.
English, yeah. Something about dogs, isn't there?
Dogs of
Hounds,
war.
well, hunting, and that's where the Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yep. Yep. So mine is much less imaginative. Yeah, I've said some of the things you said. Protective, faithful, trusting, aggressive, helpful, working dogs.
Oh, Lassie, yeah.
Lassie.
Yeah, Lassie. Yeah, there you go. See, Lassie was mid-20th century.
And also slightly younger but still quite old. The Littlest Hobo.
The who?
The Littlest Hobo.
The Littlest
That is a
Hobo. I vaguely remember the Littlest
Very
Hobo.
helpful dog, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Brave, supposedly. Yeah, and weirdly masculine. Yeah. So this is how connotation works, and this is what Saussure does. He breaks everything down to these very simple elements, and he shows us how meaning is made in this community of language speakers that is a culture. And we take all these things for granted. We don't suddenly stop when we're communicating with other people to examine how we're making meaning. This is what we learn to do, and when we do Freud next, not next week, week after next, you'll see how this gets incorporated into Freud's analysis, how he actually talks about psychoanalysis very often in terms of the way that we make meaning, or that we learn to make meaning. It's one of the things we have to learn when we're born, to make meaning. So we make meaning from within a very specific cultural context. So moving on, I'm going to show you in a minute some work by a theorist called Roland Barthes, and this is Joseph Kossuth from 1965. Of course, all these concepts, these ideas get into art. It's called 1 and 3 Chairs. Do you want to just sort of look at it for a moment and tell me why? Tell me what it's got to do with what we were just talking about.
It's the signifier and the signified. The two on the sides are the signifiers.
You
and
could
in the middle is the signified.
It's tell me where there's a signifier then.
The text, I guess that's about chair,
Mhm.
and the picture.
Dictionary
Picture of the
definition of chair, is it?
Yeah.
And then the image of the chair.
Yeah.
And then what we call a chair.
The chair, and they are all
Signs.
yes, they're all signs. Yeah. So, is there a difference in connotation in the 3 signs for chair? What are the connotations of a dictionary definition?
Authoritative.
Yes, absolutely, authority. I mean, the dictionary is the absolute authority, isn't it? It's what it gives you meaning. If you're hesitant as to the meaning of a word, it gives you the authoritative meaning. I have never forgotten looking up the word wife when I first started studying feminism in a dictionary in the British Library, and I can't remember which dictionary it was, but it said, wife, definition, the woman to whom one is married. So dictionary definitions are not innocent. The internet is not innocent. When the Webster's Dictionary or whatever on the internet gives you a definition, think about it. It is never innocent. It poses as being innocent and completely transparent and giving you a meaning that is universal. It might be useful to you, most dictionary definitions are, you're trying to write something, but think about it quite carefully and think about the ideology. So Okay, so we've done the dictionary definition. What about the connotations of the chair itself?
Authenticity.
Sorry?
Authenticity.
Yes, that's it, particularly in that context. Now, take it out of that context, and it's not authentic. Take it away from that art installation, just put it here. It's just something to sit in, yeah? In the context of that installation, it does connote authenticity, something real. And the other connotations for the actual chair.
It's not a table.
Yeah.
Everyday.
Yes, this is how this sort of installation art works. It's bringing everyday life into the gallery. So it is actually in the gallery, but it's an everyday object that changes its meaning the moment that it crosses that threshold and becomes part of an installation. And what about the photograph of the chair?
Index.
Ooh, yeah. You've done this before, haven't you?
Bits and bobs, but
Yeah, okay. So you have to tell me more now.
so it's something that refers to there having been like a chair.
Yeah.
there, like
Yeah. Okay, so it's something that refers to... What else? There are other connotations of a photograph.
Artistic.
Yes. That there is an artistry to it, that somehow someone has gone to the trouble of actually posing a chair and pointing a camera at it. Anything else?
Unchanging.
Yes, thank you. Timeless. Because this is the connotations of photography in itself. That actually when the real chair is rotting away, the photograph will persist. So there's some connotation with photography of actually capturing a moment in time and preserving it forever. And of course, what's also interesting here is that photography gets associated with a particular type of truth, that it actually does capture something authentic and preserve it. And of course, we know now that obviously photographs do not convey truth, because we know about retouching, we know about photo manipulation. Everybody does now. There were 1965, not so much. So there was still, the photograph was something to be trusted. So you've got a different type of authenticity. This is thought of as authentic in one way, and this is authentic in another way. But neither of them are true, even though they connote a form of truth. Put them in that context and it becomes something that's challenged. So just to give you some words to remember. The connotative level of signification, so this is what we're talking about, what it connotes in a cultural context, is characterised by 4 things that you might want to try and hang on to. Polysemy. Basically, there are multiple and often contradictory readings, and I think the Kossuth installation is a very good example of that the contradictory readings are all there, if you think about it long enough. So, nothing is transparently what it seems. There are contradictory meanings in the context in which you find it, but also the moment that it moves into another context, and a sign can move into a different context in seconds. Anchorage. So the context actually suggests a preferred reading. There is a way that, again, down to you walking into this space tonight, you read it in such a way that you knew it was where you were supposed to be, because there was a preferred reading. But there are other readings of this space. You could actually analyse it on the basis of a resistant reading. And this is where politics comes into it. You can actually look at texts and analyse them differently. Again, Joseph Kossuth, I think, is a very good illustration of that. He gives us a resistant reading of an everyday object, simply by placing it in a different context. He forces us to ask questions of it, and we'll come back to that. Intertextuality, this is incredibly important. Texts borrow their meaning from other texts. So connotation takes its meaning, the connotation of a sign. Basically, is always intertextual. So I've always say, for example, the Bible, Judeo-Christian Bible, whether you like it or not, gives meaning to a lot of the concepts that we use every day. You know, you can just say, oh, hell, and immediately that is intertextual. The meaning of hell is intertextual from the Judeo-Christian Bible. Otherwise we wouldn't use the term. And not only ancient texts, Harry Potter has changed the meaning of quite a lot of things. The media changes the meaning of a lot of things, or lends meaning to a lot of things. And these texts, the texts that you are reading all the time, are changing their meaning as they encounter other texts. So all meanings are intertextual. All texts, which are networks of signs, borrow their meaning, are influenced by other networks of signs. So it's dynamic. Nothing is static. Meanings are never set in stone. And mythology, which is my favourite, which is that connotations are determined by the dominant ideology. Now, the second part of this session is going to be all about ideology as Marx defined it. But what I want to do before we finish this section, I just want to introduce you to another theorist called Roland Barthes, who enabled us to understand the meaning of mythology. Barthes wrote this essay called The Photographic Message in 1961, and so this is just before Joseph Kossuth's One and Three Chairs, which is you know, and Kossuth is responding actually to Barthes' essay, which was incredibly important at the time and has remained incredibly important. So from the middle of last century, it is still influencing our critical methodologies, the way that we analyse texts. And he's interested in whether documentary photography can reveal truth. Now, people that study photography now will say, of course it doesn't. There is nothing truthful about documentary photography. That you can document something, but what is outside of the frame, that is influencing it, that is helping it to make meaning, you will miss out on. And also, the moment that you take a photograph and you put it in a context, so you put it in a magazine, or you put it in an exhibition, or you put it in your family album, or you put it on Instagram, the context will define it. So there is no truth in photography. I would say possibly there's no truth anywhere anyway, that we make different truths, but let's forget that for the moment, okay? There is no truth in documentary photography. And he came up with this idea of myth, which he says is depoliticized speech. It is the naturalization of that which is not natural, thus hiding the effects of power. Okay, just think about that for a moment. Myth is depoliticized speech. I have already said that all meaning is political. Connotation is highly political. Signs connote based on their cultural context, and all culture is political. You cannot escape it. There are no innocent signs. But we perpetuate certain sets of ideas and as I've said, every time I open my mouth, this is what I'm doing. I'm perpetuating certain sets of ideas, and you are receiving those ideas as if it's somewhat depoliticized. You walk past someone in the street and say, good morning, and that's, you think, quite innocent. Actually, no, even that's depoliticized speech. Because the connotations of your speech in that context, and I'm just making this up as I go along, I just thought of that. When you say good morning, generally you're on the way to work. And what you're actually saying is, well, it's not great, it's not a brilliant morning, but we're all making the best of it. Or in another context, good morning, good to see you, maybe see you later. But we're always saying, we're using what seem like really innocent words in the context of perpetuating our sense of who we are. When you say good morning to somebody, you're perpetuating their sense of who they are in a particular context. There are certain people in your street I bet you would not say good morning to, right? You're acknowledging certain people as important to you, as someone you would acknowledge. You are consolidating perhaps a community. So that's just an example off the top of my head, that nothing is innocent. Everything, all connotations are mythological, they're all depoliticised speech. So for Roland Barthes, semiotics becomes a tool of political analysis, and this is where it gets most interesting. So he takes the work of Ferdinand de Saussure and he develops it. He thinks, I can do something with this, which will show how meaning is political. This is how Roland Barthes came up with his ideas. He went to the dentist and, he was French, so he picks up a copy of a very popular French magazine, Paris Match, and there's a young black guy saluting on the cover. Now this is just after the Algerian War, it's 1955, or during, I don't know, I can't remember, my history is appalling. Somebody that knows more about it might want to tell me. Anyway, we know that, about France and the Algerian War. What Barthes said, what absolutely captures him is not only the fact that it's a young Algerian guy featured on the cover of Paris Match, but we know he's saluting. This is a sign. He's a sign in itself. This hand to the forehead is a sign that we all recognise that has highly political connotations. There is no flag in this image. Remember what I said about there is no truth in photography. There is something going on outside the frame that you don't know about. This photograph includes the French flag, only it doesn't. There is no French flag in that image. But what else could he be saluting?
Oh, the Algerian flag.
Yes, exactly. But he's on the cover of Paris Match, which is kind of like the Sunday Times magazine. Yeah? Remember I said context determines meaning? So what else is going on here? Anybody want to tell me?
It's sort of a celebration of, I guess, domination by that.
Yeah,
one.
absolutely. What's being naturalised? This is depoliticised speech. This is it.
The French Empire.
Yeah, French Empire is being naturalised. It's being given to us as something that, hey, there's no alternative. So think about that when you're looking at images on Instagram next. So next slide, please, Miriam. Okay, now this is for you. These are signs that are, I would say, fairly innocent. I don't drive, but they are all motorway signs. I think most of us know something about them. Choose one. Think about the connotations. So do your denotations. Just tell yourself what it is. Then do the connotations. Don't mind which one. And a longer session where I get the class to do all of them. But so just for 5 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion. Do you want to start? And choose your image.
I took the cross in the middle
Okay.
for safety, healing, Switzerland,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Precisely.
the International Red Cross.
Yeah.
It's difficult to see it without also looking at the hiker at
Mhm.
the top left and everything else and turning it into a holiday in the French Alps or something, or Swiss Alps. But
Yes, and in actual fact, although these are all separate signs that you might see on the motorway, because I've put them all together here, they become a network of signs. You can't help it. I think one of the things it illustrates is, text being networks of signs that are connected to each other through their connotations. So that's a nice cheerful analysis of the image in the centre. Any other analysis of that same image, connotations of the cross?
Well, it's not an Islamic image.
No, exactly. So there is that, yes.
Crucifix,
Yeah,
death of Christ,
yeah.
Injury.
Injury, exactly.
There's
Or-
danger. There's danger.
Danger,
around you.
yes. So we have these conflicting meanings emerging already. Particularly when when you said the hiker, I thought, oh yeah, the hiker's going to get run over.
stabbed by the knife and fork.
Absolutely. So let's do another one before we break.
I want to do top right.
Go on, do top right. Yes, of course you do.
There are just two kinds of
Yes,
bodies.
yes.
One of them
Yeah.
is a triangle,
Yeah.
and they must be separated by a line or a
Yes.
wall, and generally they aren't allowed to poo in the same place
Yeah, yeah,
because they're so different.
yeah. So it's full of that sign on its own is full of the connotations of gender, isn't it? Yeah. Do you want to read it in the context of something else, or do you want to pick another one? Has anybody got another one that they're
It's
absolutely...
nice next to the knife and fork, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. It really is, yes.
Yes, it's not a chopstick, and
Yeah, yeah, great. Reading in terms of difference, so reading in terms of what it's not. You know where you are, you're in...
It's also a specific symbol of civilization. You know, like compared
Yes,
to in India,
Yeah.
hands,
yeah,
just from the savages,
yeah,
not from
No
the
soup.
coloniser.
yeah. Just like...
No
And no
soup.
soup.
yeah, no soup, yeah.
What is
You can't have soup.
But it's also not too posh because there's not lots of different shape, size
Yeah,
knives and
Yeah.
spoons and different.
But it is absolutely, it has connotations of civilization. You're absolutely right. It's massive, that one, isn't it? One more.
petrol tank about to blow its machine brain out.
I'm glad you read it like that because that's exactly how I read it. I think it's a robot about to commit suicide. Connotations of it.
It feels old-fashioned, like it feels there's something kind of, yeah, a bit, like it feels like, it makes you realise, yeah, I guess what it points to me is like the way that these things are all, like, I guess they're all signs, they're all simplifications, and they all differ like massively from the actual signifiers.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I guess like the petrol pump, yeah, it's nice like blowing its brain out,
Yeah.
which feels appropriate. But it's also like petrol pumps don't kind of look like that anymore. I mean, it's like why don't petrol pumps look like that
Yeah.
anymore?
Yeah.
The
It's like
telephones.
it sort of
Oh,
goes
the
in the
telephone,
front,
yeah.
the side.
Yeah.
The same with the telephone and
But one
the hikers
must
even look like that anymore. Not really.
do what?
The hikers even look like that anymore.
Probably not. Well, they're all men,
They don't have
according to
staffs. They
that.
have like
Because I mean, if
ski
you know,
poles.
in the context of this, obviously he's
A walker.
hiking,
Mm.
and so you know,
He's also really good at putting his rubbish in the bin.
pretty good putting his rubbish in the bin.
She's shit at
She's-
putting her rubbish in the bin.
She's just there to be the opposite of him.
It's the rubbish bin.
Yeah.
She's just the one that he's married to.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm going.
He's the woman to whom one is married. Yes.
I mean, I
The
thought-
toilet sign is also about euphemism, which I think is quite
Yeah.
important. You know, it doesn't
It's not a picture.
tell you anything really about
No.
defecation or urination.
No.
But that's what it's meant to say.
I mean, it's totally weird, isn't it? And I just want to say before we break, connotations of this: global capitalism,
Yeah.
petrochemicals.
And all that, like
Yeah,
the
the plane,
recycling
the-
sign,
Yes.
the plane,
Yes.
the rubbish.
Yes.
It's complex.
Yes.
Bottom left is different in being an order.
Yeah, please, yeah, it's telling you to do something. Yeah, but some. I've actually had this conversation before, and people have noticed that, and then we've suddenly realised that
They're all telling you to.
they're all telling you you have to do something. So it's like keep away those planes here, or stop, get some petrol, buy petrol now.
Eat stuff.
Yes, eat stuff.
Segregate.
Yes, yes. Be gendered. Okay, yeah. Talking about connotation. I mean, that's just, and that's recent. Anyway,
When was that?
It's bizarre.
that was
isn't
last year.
Where is Walsall?
It's really fetishistic.
Yeah, next to
Wow.
Birmingham. Next to Birmingham.
That's where your ancestors are from, Dave.
Well, it's
Yeah.
also phallic, isn't it?
I don't have to say anything about that. I just, I needed it to be, I needed you to see it. Yeah, I'm going to now, if you think back through what we did in the first session, the first part of the session, so we understand something about connotation, about the way meaning is made, and we know that all meaning is political. The way we make meaning is political, nothing is innocent. As we saw, those very simple road signs are highly political. So now I'm going to sort of make a relationship between that and the Marxist concept of ideology, which is actually where Roland Barthes was coming from, and Roland Barthes very much a Marxist. So we all know who Karl Marx is, we know which century he lived, so let's move on. I think I've got, yeah, that's his mate, move on. Yeah, Marx was influenced by the philosophy of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And what he does, as you'll see, is that he takes Hegel's ideas and he twists them somewhat. So Hegel comes up with the idea of the dialectic. Now, Hegel's a philosopher. And what he's interested in is he's at the dawn of modernity, and modernity is really all about thinking beyond the logic of Christianity. It's thinking beyond Catholicism. Catholicism has held sway for a very, very, very long time until this particular period in the 18th century. Well, it's actually, okay, it begins in the 17th, but don't worry about that. This particular period where a lot of ideas are beginning to change. It's really about reading. I mean, now that we're on the subject of reading, it's about the invention of the printing press. Technology comes into it a great deal. The printing press gets invented, and then the Bible can be distributed to loads of people, and you've got a whole change of ideas where instead of the Catholic priest handing down doctrine, which says, you must do this and you must do that, and this is how you live, and nothing changes because God has decreed it. The moment people start to read the Bible for themselves, you get the idea developing that, well, if we can all read the Bible, then we can all interpret it. That we can then think through how life might be different. Hegel's one of those philosophers who's actually thinking in terms of progress. We get a concept of progress emerging throughout the 18th century and the early 19th century, which is about people moving towards a different state as opposed to being determined by the divine. They become self-determining, and this is what we have inherited now. I haven't obviously got time to go into how the whole inheritance works, but you just have to believe me that we are moderns. And the dawn of modernity really is about self-determination, and it's also about something called progress. And progress isn't always what we think it is. For Hegel, it's about the progress of the spirit towards what he calls a totality or a higher state. Now, the way Hegel uses the term spirit, you may actually want to think of it in terms of mind. It makes it easier, and it's kind of what he means anyway. So for Hegel, so forget Marx for a moment, he comes up with this idea of the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. The thesis is the current situation or state of knowledge. So it is basically, this is what we know about the world now. This is how we understand the world at this particular moment. But there is always an antithesis. There is always a contradiction. There is always something which is an irritation. So it's a contradiction which destabilises the logic of the situation or state of knowledge. I mean, if you want to go back to sort of religious texts, it's things like the thesis is God is good. The antithesis is there is suffering in the world. Okay? So, if God is good and God determines the world, there shouldn't be any suffering. So the antithesis is there is suffering. And the synthesis, I'm not going to go into it in a religious sense, but the synthesis is the resolution. So this antithesis is irritating the thesis. It's there, it's contradicting it because it exists in the world. It makes us challenge the state of knowledge, the current state of knowledge, the way that we understand the world right here, right now. Hegel says, yeah, this is what we're supposed to do. He was still a religious man. He said, this is what we're supposed to do. This is the human condition. This is what we have to do. We have to challenge the current state of the world. In order to move to a higher state, we need to come to a state of synthesis. So we need, and this is not compromise. He's not talking about compromise. He's talking about the resolution of the conflict, which brings new ideas into the world. So a new idea comes along because there is this irritation, this conflict between the thesis and antithesis. But he's all about the mind. He's all about spirit. He has no truck with the things of the world, the material of the world through which we live. So all the stuff that's around us that we actually need. Hegel has nothing to say about that. So Marx is a student of Hegel, but he says, no, hang on a sec. Because we would not be able to do all this thinking that Hegel thinks, this is where, 16th century, you've got René Descartes says, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. I'm sure you all know something about that. The French philosopher who says, oh, the meaning of being human is thinking. So it must be our job to think. He's still religious again. God wants us to think. And Hegel kind of inherits from that. This is what thinking means. This is what we apply thinking to move towards the totality, towards this higher state. And this dialectic is how we get there. And Marx comes along and he says, yeah, that's all very well, but you can't think if you are starving hungry. You can't think if you've got nowhere to live. You can't think if you're cold, because you're probably going to die. We need food, clothes and shelter in order to survive, in order to be in a position to do the thinking that Hegel thinks is our job to do. Is this all making sense? Okay, so he comes up with what's called dialectical or historical materialism. Materialism because, it's about the material of the world. How do we manipulate the material of the world so that we get the food, clothes and shelter that we need in order to function as thinking beings? So he says, he'll go with Hegel, but his thesis is somewhat different. He says, the current situation or state of knowledge always has to be related to how we get food, clothes and shelter. And he said the thesis right now, this point that he's writing at, is the Industrial Revolution, which is a massive, massive change in how people live. We're apparently going through another one at the moment. We actually, I think, have the same levels of deprivation and poverty as they had at the time that Marx was writing. And his mate, Engels, his dad was, I probably know this, his dad was a factory owner. So Marx saw it firsthand. And he saw that the thesis was this bizarre thing, and he does what we did earlier when we started deconstructing signs, making them weird, defamiliarising them. He defamiliarises in his writing the idea of private property, the idea that there is a property-owning class that actually owns also the labour of the proletariat. This is alienated labour, and this is the antithesis. The thesis is private property, which is capitalism. This is how this is how it's working at the time, industrial capitalism. The antithesis is alienated labour. Alienated because it must be, to be human, get food, clothes and shelter. You must need to own the means of production. You must need to own what you require in order to get that. To go is absolutely ridiculous. He defamiliarises this whole stupid process that certain people actually own the land and the factories and everything, and a load of other people go and work for them, and actually have to go through this ridiculous process of then coming out and getting this arbitrary wage, which then they have to go into the shop and spend money to go and buy the bread and the socks or whatever it is that they need. He said this is just an irritation, it's a contradiction, it's ridiculous. It cannot hold that there are a certain class of people that have all the property, the land, everything, and that they kind of dole out a certain portion to a certain load of other people who must, because they think, and this is where we go back to cogito ergo sum, to be human is to think. The proletariat, because they think, must at some point come to the conclusion that this is a ridiculous situation, it's an intolerable situation. And having come to that conclusion, then they will rise up and seize the means of production, which you probably know about. This is the resolution of the conflict, which moves not necessarily knowledge, but actually the whole material world onto a higher plane, onto a more egalitarian situation from which then people can move onwards. This is vulgar Marxism, I say, without the economics. Okay, this is the basics. Makes absolute sense, yes? So I've pulled out some things that Marx says, one that you will recognise, others that maybe you won't. I like his idea of species being, so I pulled out this quote. So he says, conscious life activity directly distinguishes man from animal life activity. It is just because of this that he is a species being, or it is only because he is a species being that he is a conscious being, i.e. that his own life is an object for him. That's kind of complex. Marx can be like really clear one moment and then completely confusing the next. But I kind of like this concept of spirit. What he's trying to say is that the essence of who we are as a species is that we direct our intelligence, our ability to think, our ability to see the future, to plan, to gain what we need to continue to be conscious. This is our species being. This is what we are, this is what we do, fundamentally. If we didn't do all this stuff, we wouldn't exist. So it makes sense that this is our function. And he's not saying that God makes us do this, he's just saying that this is common sense, this is who we, this is precisely what we require to do. And if you put all your mental faculties into thinking through the best possible way that you can carry on thinking, you're going to look at this ridiculous situation of, the bourgeoisie getting, fat and rich and sitting around and having, the most of the benefit from your labour. And you're going to say, no, this cannot hold. I also love the fact that he says labour in the white skin can never free itself so long as labour in the black skin is branded. Because what he's doing, he's comparing alienated labour to slavery. And then the famous, and I think this is from the Communist Manifesto. It is, yes. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist. This is what he actually. Well, this is the translation I've got anyway. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. Okay, so it's a call to revolution. It's like, I've given you this rationale. Now go and do something with it. I've given you, the thinking. This should just shift your thinking into another gear. And once your thinking shifts into another gear, you'll recognise what you need to do. And there's more of you than there are of the bourgeoisie. I mean, this is what's in there. It's saying there's tons of you, and you're really strong. There's actually, I think it's Matthew Arnold. There's quite a lot of it. I think Matthew Arnold is the most alarmist. When they suddenly realise that there's all these really muscle-bound men. Not to mention the women, because proletarian women were not, sitting at home looking after the babies. They were working in the factories as well, and they, the cities are becoming full of these people that are very strong because they're manipulating this extraordinary machinery, And so they're fit. And Matthew Arnold gets into a blind panic about, oh my God, what if they start talking to each other? What if they start forming, communities? What if they start, realising that actually their strength? And Mark says, well, yeah, precisely what's going to happen. I want you to listen to this song. Some of you are going to know this song. I want you to listen to the words, and then I've got a little exercise for you.
Well, I left Kentucky back in '49 and went to Detroit working on assembly line. The first year they had me putting wheels on Cadillacs. Every day I'd watch them beauties roll by, and sometimes I'd hang my head and cry, 'cause I always wanted me one that was long and black. One day I devised myself a plan that should be the envy of most any man. I'd sneak it out of there in a lunchbox in my hand. Now getting caught meant getting fired, but I figured I'd have it all by the time I retired. I'd have me a car worth at least $100 grand. I'd get it one piece at a time, and it wouldn't cost me a dime. You'll know it's me when I come through your town. I'm gonna ride around in style, I'm gonna drive everybody wild, 'cause I'll have the only one there is around. So the very next day when I punched in with my big lunchbox and with help from my friend, I left that day with a lunchbox full of gears. I've never considered myself a thief, but GM wouldn't miss just one little piece, especially if I strung it out over several years. The first day I got me a fuel pump, and the next day I got me an engine and a trunk, then I got me a transmission and all the chrome. The little things I could get in my big lunchbox, like nuts and bolts and all four shocks, but the big stuff was snuck out my buddy's mobile home. Now up to now my plan went all right till we tried to put it all together one night, and that's when we noticed that something was definitely wrong. The transmission was a 53 and the motor turned out to be a 73, and when we tried to put in the bolts, all the holes were gone. So we drilled it out so that it would fit, and with a little bit of help from an adapter kit, we had that engine running just like a song. Now the headlights, there was another sight. We had two on the left and one on the right, but when we pulled out the switch, all three of them come on. The back end looked kind of funny too, but we put it together, and when we got through, well, that's when we noticed that we only had one tail fin. About that time, my wife walked out, and I could see in her eyes that she had her doubts, but she opened the door and said, "Honey, take me for a spin." So we drove uptown just to get the tags, and I headed to right on down Main Drag. I could hear everybody laughing for blocks around. But up there at the courthouse, they didn't laugh, 'cause to type it up, it took the whole staff, and when they got through, the title weighed 60 pounds. I got it one piece at a time, and it didn't cost me a dime. You'll know it's me when I come through your town. I'm gonna ride around in style, I'm gonna drive everybody wild, 'cause I'll have the only one there is around. Yeah, Red Ryder, this is the Cottonmouth in the Psycho Billy Cadillac, come on. This is the Cottonmouth, and negatory on the cost of this machine there, Red Ryder. You might say I went right up to the factory and picked it up. It's cheaper that way. What model is it? Well, it's a 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59 automobile. It's a 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70 automobile.
Johnny Cash, the Man in Black. There's your questions. So think about it for a minute and let me know what you think. So why did he not consider himself a thief? Who does the finished car belong to? What do you think it's worth? And why laugh? What's funny about it? When you're ready.
Well, he's like not. I never consider myself a thief because it's his labour and he has made it.
So
The pieces that he steals, they're his, he makes them.
Yeah.
And he's not being rewarded.
And he's not being
for the
rewarded,
work.
you know,
Yeah,
yeah.
piece for piece.
Yeah.
Because it's the
Well, just
opposite,
because they're little, like, so it's like they're insignificant in the like each little bit is
They will be
yeah,
missed.
no one's gonna miss it, yeah, and then yes, it's not really stealing. It's like who's gonna
Yeah, okay.
It's the opposite of assembly line production. That's the joke, I think.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, my granddad, you know, was at Somme as a young man. He worked for the Austin factory in Birmingham, and he was a part of a group, a team of half a dozen people who built a car, just like that, one piece
Yeah.
at a time. He was, i.e., he was
Yeah.
and then into war production, but he was pre-assembly line.
Yeah.
He was in a group that built a whole car, and this is the opposite. And that's what he's confounding, what he's resisting in a sense.
Do the labourers that built the whole car pre-assembly line, did the finished car belong to them?
No, but they were proud of what they'd done, in a way which, twisting the rivet and the next thing goes, a well-run
Oh, for
thing.
sure. I mean, yeah, I'm not denying that they could be proud of it,
It was a
but
different kind of production.
yes. But would they have been thieves if they'd just driven the car out of the factory without paying for it? Or without going to a dealership and buying it?
Yeah, legally, of course.
Yes.
Morally
Okay.
not.
It's about alienation, the whole thing is about the fact that workers are producing but they don't own the means to do it or the product.
Yeah.
And they can't afford to buy the product.
Yeah.
So
They can work and work and never be able
it's
to
the
do it.
inherent abuse that's in the condition of employment. Just as just as the slave is more directly the victim of violence, they are the victim of a system of alienation in which the violence is more subtle.
For sure. But what's the car worth then?
It's worth whatever anyone, however anyone values it in its context.
No, its value to him might be rather different. He built it.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
So it would be worth
So I
different
think
things.
this is kind of
Yeah.
the point, isn't it?
That's the thing, that if he would be really proud of it, even if it looked pretty weird, because it was genuinely his.
Mhm.
So he's talking about a means of trying to do unalienated labour in the middle of a system of alienation.
Absolutely, he is. So then why are we laughing?
I suppose it subverts
Because-
all the everyday understandings about what's going on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It defamiliarises. It becomes something that's been completely naturalised through mythology. Yes, that word that Roland Barthes comes up with. But mythology completely naturalises the idea that we go to work, we may build a car. I mean, most of us probably don't here right now, but we can imagine doing it. But then our wages will never be enough to actually go and buy that car. It becomes completely natural. So we laugh at it because of logical inconsistency. But it shouldn't be logically inconsistent. As you pointed out, you can feel proud of building something and
There's a contradiction between use value and exchange value.
well, yes, absolutely, and that's fundamental.
And my granddad did eventually buy an Austin 7.
Really good for him. Good for him. Yes. Now, okay, I nicked this from the internet. It's not a very good chart, but I couldn't be bothered to do my own. So this, according to Marx, is the social structure of capitalism. Worth bearing in mind because we're going to be upending it a bit next session. We're going to be swapping it around a bit. This is the base and there's the superstructure. So according to Marx, everything in the base is, first of all, the means of production. So this is all the raw material that you need. So the factory itself, the land the factory is built on, the raw material that you need to, let's say, produce your car. the machines, the tools, and of course the workers. So the means of production, I think, are, you know, this chart puts the lumpen proletariat and the proletariat in the relations of production, but I think they're also the means of production. I think they should be in both. Lumpen proletariat are the unemployed, the people that need to be, you know, always need, capitalism always needs unemployment.
Like the underclass.
The underclass. It absolutely requires that to justify the wages that it pays the proletariat. The labour aristocracy, so your management, the petty bourgeoisie, which are the shop owners, and the bourgeoisie, who are the land and property owners. And of course, and again, sort of, you know, means of production, relations of production, I think that they've mixed this up a bit. The private property, the actual capital and the commodities that are produced are also part of the means of production, as well as the relations of production. But if you can think of the base as being the stuff, the tangible stuff, the stuff you can touch, the material stuff of the world, which produces what we require to keep capitalism going, but also to keep us in food, clothes and shelter. And the superstructure is what keeps this going. It's what makes this seem natural and eternal. So it's everything to do with ideology. It's, which, yeah, they have put it there. The law is a big one, obviously. The law seems somehow to be natural. The police force seems to be a natural thing. We need the police force. Everyone goes, oh yes, it's wonderful that we've got the police force. Because some people steal. Poor Johnny Cash, you know, you can imagine. The law is, we think, correct. We don't, obviously, in this room necessarily, but in general, it's understood that, yeah, the law is correct. There is such a thing as theft. There is such a thing as private property. Therefore, there is such a thing as theft, and theft should be punished. The media, well, that's massive at the moment. The media perpetuates the ideology of capitalism constantly, and I think Roland Barthes is one of the first to point this out, and that cover of Paris Match absolutely crystallises the idea not only that nationalism is something that is naturalised, and that, as we said, French imperialism then becomes also normalised and naturalised, but of course it also implies that capitalism is a natural system, and the media constantly perpetuates that idea. Politics, obviously. Science, yeah, for sure, because, and particularly now, and we're now in a system of neoliberal capitalism, which I won't go into the meaning of that because I haven't got time right now, but we'll do that in sessions to come, where science actually is becoming an activity that used to be thought of as something separate from economics, as something that was protected from economics, was something that we absolutely required to progress, to move technology forward. Actually, what's happening now is that certain things don't get funded. It used to be such a thing as blue sky research. We don't have that anymore. We only have the kind of scientific research that is funded by the bourgeoisie, by the people that own the means of production, which is why there's a lot more money in cryogenic preservation, so freezing bodies for rich people so that they can be presumably have their brains uploaded into the computers or whatever it is, than there is in curing diseases that really we should have cures for by now. There is, diseases that people die of, not in this country necessarily, but in other countries across the world, that we could have cures for, but instead we spend, science is devoted to preserving the bodies and the brains of rich people. Education, what I do, and actually, education that is totally suffused with ideology. Universities used to be a place, and they still are to a minor extent, where this stuff gets taught and ideology gets challenged. Certainly the school system isn't. The school system churns out the workers. The system produces the fodder for the machine. Art, art can challenge ideology, but it also can perpetuate it, of course, because we have there is a system of privilege in art, certainly, and I won't go into that in any depth because I don't have time, but I would actually say that art can do both, that art can challenge ideology, that it can be a force for critique, but at the same time it can perpetuate a very unequal system where money changes hands for artwork, for arbitrary reasons. The family, oh, don't get me started. Oh my God, the family completely, and this is one of the things we'll be doing in the next session. When we do Sigmund Freud, what we're actually looking at is the way that the family produces workers. It produces the distinction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and it continues to do so. The person that made this says culture as if all the other things here aren't culture. All the other things here are culture. This is what we're talking about. This is the culture that we live in, the signs that we're surrounded by and that we're reading non-stop every day and making meaning out of. Religion, yes, of course, and philosophy, well, yeah, depends on your philosopher. We'll come back to that. Now, the point that Marx makes is that the base and the superstructure support and maintain each other. The base only remains as it is because the superstructure exists and because the superstructure controls the ideas. So our ideas of what is normal or natural, which are controlled by everything in the superstructure, keep the base in place. They keep it going. So if you change, it seems that this is where it sort of gets a little bit, right, okay. So supposedly, if you can change the ideas in the superstructure, then the base will change. Then we can challenge the relations of production. Then the relations of production seem weird, defamiliarized, and odd, and not natural or normal. But we can do that, and nothing changes. So we need to go a little bit further, which is what we will do in sessions to come. This is what happens. This is what happens to everything is commodified. The commodity in neoliberal capitalism is absolutely bloody everything. And this beer company obviously knows that knowing people that have studied this stuff, people that understand Marx will go, oh, that's my beer, and immediately hand over the money. So very clever, yeah. So this is what has become a base and superstructure.
Strong. It's satirised though, isn't it? And that's partly because it's an obsolete metaphor.
What do you mean by obsolete metaphor?
Well, it's not my observation, but Marx used a metaphor derived from building, from construction.
Yes, sure.
And if you wanted to present a modern metaphor, you would need to use IT categories about coding and so on too.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because we can go back to the first part of the session where we talked about the way that codes change their meaning. Now we can still talk about base and superstructure, and in fact we have to still talk about base and superstructure because Marx gave us the language. He gave us the language to talk about something that had never been talked about before. What hadn't been talked about before was, there were philosophers like Hegel, loads of them, talking about, to be human is to think. So what do we think about? What do we apply our thinking to? That's what they were all doing. So 17th, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, this is what they were all about. Okay. Marx comes along and he talks about something nobody has talked about before, which is the material stuff of the world. So he applies the ideas of the philosophers to understand. He says, this is all very well that our job is to think, but you can't think if you're at death's door. So he gives us a new vocabulary. Doesn't mean to say that vocabulary even, you know, all language is metaphorical. I think this is what we've been talking about. Yeah, it's not obsolete if it can change its meaning, if it can adapt. And I think this is what contemporary philosophers do. They still work with the idea of base and superstructure. It has dramatically changed its meaning, and I think that now, if we wanted to understand what the base consists of, we would have to radically change what was in that chart. That's what I call, you know, as I said, it's vulgar Marxism. It's the most basic form of Marxism. This is stripping it down to, well, okay, what did he mean, you know, in its most basic form. But we still use these ideas.
But I mean, in some ways, but it depends where you're sitting in the world as well.
Yeah. Yeah, tell me more.
Well, just in the sense that, I mean, suppose if we are described as post-industrial, I mean, and of course all of this is contentious, but you know, there's parts of the world which are super-industrial, which are providing stuff that we used to provide.
Yeah, totally. And so it's gone global. Yeah. In actual fact, we still have a base, and so this is why I say what's in the base is not necessarily in this country.
Yeah.
Coltan mining.
Yeah.
That's it. That's, you know, that is very much a very large part of contemporary base.
Coal.
Oh, coal, indeed. Yeah. The superstructure is global because we've got the internet. The superstructure now pretty much is the internet. It certainly perpetuates the superstructure. I mean, there's, you know, it's highly complex. I was actually reading, there's a lot of writing about it now because we're supposedly in this sort of fourth industrial revolution heading towards AI. Yes. So Marxist philosophers are trying to catch up. And there's some very interesting ideas. I think, you know, that we do have to consider the way that we are re-enslaving parts of the world, but we are doing it every single time that we, you know, when you pick up your phone, which has now become a part of you. It's now become something that we cannot do with, and we cannot think without, which is really interesting. Every time you pick up your phone, you are perpetuating that system. And I think this is something that we need to take very seriously. And that we need to take seriously the fact that what it means to be human now is to live with this phone. So this whole idea that to be human is to think, well, yeah, but you need this little computer to do your thinking. And, you know, I don't know about anybody else here, but my job now doesn't work without my phone. I can't get into my email or my cloud account without a code being sent to my phone. And you know, my employer didn't actually supply that phone. It's something that's now assumed to be a part of you. So we're in a quite a strange point of history, which is kind of fascinating and exciting in one way and horrifying in another one. So I think this kind of illustrates it. Coming back to what we started with. The way that this now makes meaning. So connotations of this beer, folks.
Well, it's still beer.
So it probably tastes exactly the same as the one I've just been drinking. Yeah. But what is it selling itself as?
There's a kind of elitism to it, isn't there? There's
Yeah.
a kind of, like, it's clever and the illustration's great, and I'm sure beer tastes good, like beer tastes good here, but it's like, it's not part of, like, it's not part of a general fabric. It's
Yeah.
like,
Falsely knowing.
It's false, and that is knowing. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So it's like it's got it's marketing itself to us, probably.
And it's also perhaps, I mean, or maybe precisely the opposite. It's that nothing matters.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, revolution, superstructure base. It's all, you know,
we've won.
We are.
Yeah.
You know, all that. Forget it. You know, it's beer now.
Yeah.
I would probably be really excited to see this slide.
Who would? Marx?
Revolution Brewing.
Oh God, I'm sure they would. I'm sure they'd be delighted. It's like, oh yeah, and this is exactly what we wanted. Yeah, I know.
9% beer. That's some potent beer there.
It's 9%, yeah. I know, it's like a special brew, isn't it?
Ah, but it's American, so it's slightly different measure
Oh.
of alcohol content, I believe.
Oh, okay. So they're
Is
lying.
that true, the American system of... Yeah, I think it is. But it is strong, nevertheless.
There's a sort of taming, isn't there, in the sense that you can, the best thing to do with Marxism is to know about it rather than
Yes.
have it happening.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it. It's such a good way of putting it. That it's just a body of knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
That it's not about action. So according to Marx, ideology naturalises, it historicises and it eternalises. That is, ideological structures appear to be natural. I think we've done all this, but this is just sort of revision. This is like according to the order of things. So something that you, every day, picking up that phone, which we all do all the time, we don't question that gesture. Ideological structures appear to be the logical conclusion to a historical development. I think this is, you know, the fact that we still believe in progress, and we still harbour this idea that somehow, you know, progress happens, and oh yes, history was always leading to this place, which is, you know, not necessarily true. And that there is an assumption that now this supposedly natural state of affairs has been reached, things will be that way, barring regression. So again, this concept of progress is absolutely, you know, fundamental to contemporary ideology, and it's something that I think that we need to challenge. Anyway.
We need to challenge the concept of progress.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
I sort of think we need to defend it.
Why?
Against
Tell me.
its subversion, because there is a very powerful argument that the idea of progress is a redundant, antique idea, and that
I think it's a dangerous idea.
I think the idea of human emancipation is absolutely based upon it.
Well, if you're a
there are
Marxist,
conflicting ideas of progress.
there are certainly conflicting ideas of progress, but I would want to challenge it. You know why I would challenge it? This is one reason, is exactly what we were just talking about. That what has become naturalised is that it's okay to exploit certain parts of the world in the name of progress.
Yes.
Yes? And that is why I think it's a dangerous idea, and I would want to challenge it. Now, if you think if you agree with Marx, obviously we do, we agree with Marx that yes, there is a form of progress in which we move towards a state in which, you know, there is no longer exploitation, inequality and conflict. I'd say fine. But progress, as in the ideology of contemporary capitalism,
Conquest of nature and so on, yes.
Yes.
But there has to be an idea of progress. If there isn't, there is no
Yeah,
hope.
What about just change?
Hegel and Marx had an idea of progress inherently in it. That's what
yes,
they say.
yeah, absolutely it does. But
Well,
I would say that we want to, again, back to language, we need to challenge the meaning of progress. You don't just accept that everybody agrees that progress is the same thing. As I've said before, every time I open my mouth, every time a word leaves my lips, you receive it differently. Not as differently as some of the people out there in the street. If I go out and say to them, what do you think of as progress?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
like what the Labour Party conceives of as progress is different to what the
Yeah.
Tory Party conceives of as progress.
Mhm.
Those are radically different understandings
Yeah.
of what progress is.
So I think that is, you know, it's the code, the signifier, that needs to be dramatically challenged. And I think that, you know, technological progress, I love technology, I really enjoy it, but I question it.
No, of course, but the struggle of ordinary people for a better life is the meaning of human history. That seems to be an axiomatic moral position.
Depending on what you consider to be better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to see what artificial intelligence makes of semiotics, actually.
Yeah. Maybe we just leave the planet until we get to AI. I mean, you know, stop struggling. Anyway, it is now 9 o'clock, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.